Late in the week, there was a terrific traffic jam in New Mexico City. And if you've ever been to Mexico City, it's a city that is a constant traffic jam. So when I say there was a traffic jam, there was more than the usual because they had closed the street in the city center so that the Occupy DF could be there. Yes, Occupy Mexico City was in residence. And I pitched in a little bit to help set up a tent or two. And unlike our American occupiers, though, they got official government permission to close the street, and official government medical supplies were there to help them. So there seems to be less antagonism, at least at the official level. But the demands were exactly those we've been hearing here in the North. And like our own Occupy movement here in the United States, there were often younger adults, not poor people, but younger people with strong political and social ideals. I mention all this because I was surprised when I returned and came to the office on Friday that the last vestige of the Occupy Grand Rapids movement was gone. They had a sheet up there, and it wasn't a very pretty sheet, I have to admit, but it was there. They had been retreating, as it were, because of the cold weather, and I understand that, but I felt sad because of all the decisions that I've made without consulting all of you. Letting them park on our porch is the one I am most proud of. I am, even though I know that that wasn't something everyone agreed with, because it's never without controversy here when people say, we are by definition not of one mind. Let me put it that way. And because churches are emotional institutions, they're held together by friendships and affections and memories and loyalties. When you do something that someone disagrees with, it puts tension in the affectionate relationship. It's hard. It's easy to be a man of integrity when there's no one around. It's much more difficult when the people you care about and who care about you might disagree with you. But integrity is choosing the best course you know and bearing the consequences of that. And to me, the cost, though real, was worth it in order to demonstrate a kind of hospitality that seemed to be missing. You know, the oldest law in civilization is the law of hospitality. In ancient times, if you were off in the desert or along one of those roads and you knocked on a tent at night, they had to let you in. There was no option. They couldn't turn you away. These might even be people who were your enemies. Unless you were an actual physical threat, ancient law said you had to take someone in. If you're a Muslim, you're enjoined to entertain them and care for them for 3 days. In the book in the Torah, we read, "You shall not oppress the stranger, for you know the soul of a stranger, for you have been strangers in Egypt." That's how old that is. And even Christians are told that they should welcome strangers in their midst because often people have entertained angels unawares. So at the most ancient level, the stranger is not someone to be turned away, but to be welcomed. So that was behind some of my thought, that we need to welcome these outsiders and give them refuge. But, you know, it was really a little different, to be honest. The Occupy people were not travelers or strangers. They weren't lost. They weren't in need. And what I did was not to give them a meal or a night's lodging, but literally to give them sanctuary, a place of refuge over a long period of time. And to some, after a while, that presence was not that of a visitor in need, but more like the man who came to dinner. You remember that story? The guest who takes up residence with a broken leg and slowly imposes himself on the household until the whole household is organized around his selfish needs. And after some weeks, when the news was no longer focused on the Occupy movement, it had moved on to more important things like debates. That's an ironic statement, by the way. The portico was beginning to look a little raggedy, and they weren't really good at the house cleaning part, and it began to look more like a squatter's camp than a hospitality gesture. You know, that's where I want to go, is with the squatters today. The musical theater work, Rent, that we're focusing on all month long is about a bunch of people who qualify like those Occupy folks who are on the fringes of society. If you know the show, they're all marginal people. They're the outcasts, the misfits, the ones who don't fit or won't fit in. Half the characters in the show have HIV. Half of them are gay, and they're not the same ones. Half are not white. And while they're not beggars on the street, they are like them in that they are squatters on the sidewalks of our daily life. They take up residence in the unused spaces that they don't own, and they act in ways that we don't approve of. They sing at the wrong time, they dance on the tabletops, they wear odd clothing. In fact, the author of the show, Jonathan Larson, based the whole thing on Puccini's opera, La Bohème, so he, in essence, squatted on that. You know, when Thomas Jefferson drafted the famous Declaration of Independence, he squatted, as it were, on John Locke, the famous English philosopher, because he took right from John Locke the idea of natural rights, including life and liberty, but he did a little substitution. He substituted that lovely phrase, pursuit of happiness, for John Locke's property. But, you know, property is not inconsequential. What John Locke meant is everyone has a right to obtain a spot they can stand on and no one can push them off. A hunk of land is what he meant. And if you don't have a home, if you're homeless, if you don't own land, you are virtually a vagrant. You are a mendicant. You become a beggar. You're an indigent. And so a squatter is someone who claims something as home that isn't theirs. We have a lot of empty buildings around here. Occasionally people go and live in them anyway. Those are squatters. But it's useful, I think, to remember that much of the land we occupy came from people across an ocean who were originally landless. The African slave, torn from his land, had no place to hide and so was sold into slavery, had no place in Africa and so was taken into slavery. The poor of Europe who sold themselves into indentured servitude in order to work it off here that they might have a chance to claim a piece of land on the unsold vastness of America. Jews, for example, came here because in Europe they were often not even allowed to own land. They were virtually homeless wherever they were. And of course, we forget that the nation itself is a squatter on the lands of the people who lived here for generations beforehand. We are all squatting on someone else's land all the time, and that's the point I want to make. There is no place that belongs to us, no land, no house, no home that we can claim as ours in perpetuity. Every place we stand was someone else's at some point, and will be someone else's in the future. I live in a great house. It was built in 1887, so I didn't make it. I'm squatting on that person's land. Actually, not that person, but all the owners that followed it. I'm using owners in quotation marks because what they did was, I'll give you money and I'll let you stand here and so on and so on. I bought it from a gay couple who moved to Saugatuck, and they're busy renovating somebody else's house that was built before they were there. And of course, this church sits on the land of another church that was before it, and before that it was something else. And before all that it was a farm, and before all that it was the places where the Ottawa and the Ojibwe camped and lived and hunted. Locke is wrong. There is no innate right to life, liberty, or property. We don't have any right to any of those things, because all of us are squatters in a cosmic sense, a wanderer, a vagrant. And what truly disturbs us then about the beggars, the vagrants, the wanderers, the misfits, is that they remind us that we are just like them, really. We're just better at pretending we're not.